All right, so we've been leading up to secession, and obviously we know South Carolina is going to secede first. And the thing that really finally pushes South Carolina over the edge is going to be the election of 1860, which is the election of Abraham Lincoln. So we can't talk about electing Abraham Lincoln if we don't know anything about Abe in the first place. So let's talk about Abe Lincoln. So Abe was born in 1809 in Louisville, Kentucky. If you know anything about him, then you know that when he starts his political career, he's really, when he gets into Congress, he's representing the state of Illinois, and that's usually the state that's associated with him, but he wasn't actually from Illinois originally. He was from Kentucky. He was born to some really poor parents, but they were very religious, especially his mom, and with all of that deep Christianity came a deep, deep hatred of slavery. So when he got a little bit older, they moved to Indiana, which was in the Northwest Territory. And if you remember from the Northwest Ordinance, we outlawed slavery in the Northwest Territory a long time before this. That's just one of the reasons why the Lincoln family decided to move there. And after living in Indiana for a little while, they moved to a town called New Salem in Illinois. So when he's living in Illinois, he works as a clerk at a store, and then eventually decides that he wants to get involved in politics. He runs for state legislature and loses, but then he runs again and he wins. And so Abe Lincoln is elected to his first political office, his first elected seat at the age of 25, which is pretty impressive as a young dude. That's how old I am now. So it'd be like me already serving in the North Carolina legislature, which would be pretty cool. So while he was working as a state congressman, he started working as a lawyer. A lawyer is a pretty common job for people involved in politics. He works as a lawyer while he serves 4 terms for the state. He has a pretty consistent voting record. If you look at Lincoln's votes throughout his state political career and national, he's pretty consistent in terms of slavery. He always votes against the expansion of slavery and always votes in favor of abolitionist groups. But in 1842, he decides to give up politics and be a family man. So in 1842, he quits politics and marries Mary Todd Lincoln. And if you know anything about Mary Todd Lincoln, you've probably heard before that she's crazy. And that is true. She was a little nuts, and that's because she had bipolar disorder. But back in the 1800s, we didn't know anything about mental illness, so there was no real therapy, and there was definitely no medicine to regulate the chemicals in her brain, to keep her steady instead of manic and depressive. So if you read anything about Mary Todd Lincoln, it's usually that she was a little nuts. Like there was a situation where she once tried to sell all the furniture in the White House. So yeah, she was pretty crazy. So being married to her alone for 4 years was enough for Lincoln, and in 1846 he gets back into politics. He goes back, and this time he runs for National Congress, and he is elected, so he serves as a representative from the state of Illinois. And once again we see that consistent voting record, adamantly opposing slavery while he's in office. He even voted in favor of the Wilmot Proviso, and if you remember what that was, it proposed that we would ban slavery in all of the territory that we get from Guadalupe Hidalgo from the Mexican cession. So we know it fails, but Abe Lincoln is one of the people that votes in favor of it. So when Zachary Taylor was running for president, he got very involved in Taylor's campaign, doing a lot of speaking on his behalf, thinking that maybe if Taylor won, that he'd be rewarded with a job, a new appointment, possibly even a executive cabinet position. But it doesn't happen for him, and he's feeling very discouraged about the political nonsense and all of that. So he decides once again that he's going to give it up. So he gives up politics a second time and resigns from Congress in 1849. But he comes back into the political arena in sort of the 1850s because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. When Stephen Douglas writes and passes the Kansas-Nebraska Act, Abraham Lincoln is pretty pissed. And you remember that the Kansas-Nebraska Act undoes the Missouri Compromise. And that's something that Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans were not at all okay with. So Abraham Lincoln decides to get back into politics. So in 1858, Stephen Douglas is up for re-election, and remember, he was a senator from Illinois, and Lincoln decides to give up his position at that point as a state senator and run for that Senate seat, run against Stephen Douglas. So what we get out of that is something called the Lincoln-Douglas debates. These two guys debate 7 times in 7 different cities. And it was sort of like a traveling carnival or festival. It was a very big production, very elaborate events, marching bands, fireworks, banners, a huge major source of excitement. And they quickly, because of all of that, eventually gained national attention. And the main issue in all of these debates is going to be the expansion of slavery, because that's one thing that Abraham Lincoln has always been against, and that's something that Stephen Douglas has made possible, right, is the expansion of slavery with the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So these two guys are very different. Aside from being physically different, Stephen Douglas was only 5'4", and Abraham Lincoln was 6'5", so very physically different, but Abraham Lincoln was also very different in terms of personality. Lincoln was a calm speaker, chose his words very carefully. He really tried to appeal to people's logic and reason in terms when he was trying to, give an argument, but he also had a very dry and sarcastic sense of humor. On the other side, Stephen Douglas was quite the opposite, and a lot of that could have had to do with his height, but he was very loud, a boisterous, ostentatious type of person, would stomp his feet, yell, wave his fists around type of thing. He was much more theatrical. And so he painted Lincoln as a radical. That was, remember, we've said that was a go-to move for the Democrats, to paint the Republicans to look like radicals. So through these elections, we do consider Lincoln to be the winner of the debates, but Douglas does manage to win the election. So he is reelected as a senator, which is actually going to be good, right, in the long run, because it frees Abe Lincoln to run for president in 1860. So definitely the most important of those 7 debates is the second one, because from the second debate we get what we call the Freeport Doctrine. And the Freeport Doctrine is actually something that Stephen Douglas says during the second debate. What happens is Lincoln speaks first, and he's speaking on the idea of a human being enslaved to another. And he says, that's just not logical. It's not compatible with our ideas of self-government. We can't be a country founded on the principle of self-government when at the same time we believe that one human can own another. Those two things don't go with each other. So he says to Stephen Douglas, how do you explain the idea of popular sovereignty with the Dred Scott decision? These two things shouldn't go together. Can you explain that? And Stephen Douglas says his response is the Freeport Doctrine. He says slavery could not exist a day, an hour, anywhere unless it was supported by local police regulations. And if you want to protect slavery, you have to protect it on a local level. And if you want to get rid of slavery, you have to get rid of it on a local level. And Southerners really do not disagree with this statement. They really do not agree with the statement, because he's essentially saying that it's possible to make slavery illegal, and that is not what they're down for. At the same time, the North doesn't really like this, because he's sort of brushing off, any type of national goal of getting rid of slavery, which seems difficult. So that statement, that idea is going to be known as the Freeport Doctrine, because he gives that speech in Freeport, Illinois. So we get to the election of 1860. If you know anything about the presidential electoral process, it all has to begin with the national party conventions for each party. So at this point, we've got the Republicans and the Democrats. The Democrats hold their convention in Charleston in the spring, and the Southern Democrats arrive in Charleston with really two goals. Number one, we got to protect slavery. Let's put it in the party platform. Number two, let's make sure that Stephen Douglas is not nominated as president. You know, they really hated him. The Northern Democrats are going in with the total opposite. They want to make sure that Stephen Douglas is the nominee for the Democrats, and they really support popular sovereignty instead of writing slavery in. So the North and the South can't agree, so the Southern Democrats end up walking out without nominating anyone. So the Democrats are forced to hold a second convention in Baltimore in June, and at this convention, so many Southerners don't attend that it makes it easy to nominate Stephen Douglas as the official nominee for the Democratic Party. But as a sort of a sign of good faith, they nominate a Southerner for vice president, and that is going to be a guy named John C. Breckinridge. So they nominate Stephen Douglas and John C. Breckinridge. But some of the more radical Democrats are still not happy, and they break off and they form a new party, their own third party called the Constitutional Union Party, or you can abbreviate it CUP. And the CUP nominates a guy named John Bell, who was a senator from Tennessee. Now, the Republican convention goes very differently. It is held in Chicago, Illinois, and Maine. And when the Republicans attend the convention, they really see a guy named William Seward as being the front runner and the most likely nominee. But he was an abolitionist, and they were worried about his electability. You know, can they elect an abolitionist, or will this alienate some of the more moderate independent voters? So they decide to go with someone who's more moderate, and that is Abraham Lincoln. So they nominate Abe, and they write into their party platform that they are opposed to the spread of slavery, as well as they maintain a firm commitment to the preservation of the Union. So no secession whatsoever. So the campaign begins, and once again, this is a very racist campaign from the Democrats, painting the Republicans to look like radicals, as well as, really racist against African Americans as far as how they speak about and portray them in relation to the Republican Party. So what ends up that while the Republicans, on the other hand, they're not attacking, they're having a much more positive campaign, and they really brand Lincoln as Honest Abe. That's where that comes from the election of 1860, from that campaign and the Republicans. So what happens is we see a split in the Democratic Party. Our Southern Democrats write in John C. Breckinridge as president. Northern Democrats vote for Stephen Douglas, and then we've got those radicals voting for John Bell in the Constitutional Union Party. And because the Democratic vote is so split, it's easy for the Republicans to get a majority. So Abraham Lincoln only gets 40% of the popular vote, but that's enough to win the majority of electoral votes. So Abraham Lincoln wins. And this is a huge deal because this is a party founded on the hatred of slavery is now the controlling power. And that has never happened before. So we know drama is going to come from this.